In the ruins of a dead world, silence reigned. The planet had no name, only a designation long erased from records, a whisper in the void left by those who had perished in its final days. Zalith 9, as humanity had come to call it, was a graveyard of titanic proportions, hulking monoliths of an extinct empire clawed toward the heavens, their surfaces marred by the scars of forgotten wars. Elias Voss had been in places like this before, the shattered remains of civilizations that had once thought themselves eternal. He had walked through the remnants of beings that had conquered the stars, only to vanish like smoke in a storm. But this place felt different. His boots pressed against the dust, and with each step, ancient ashes stirred in protest. Something watched him here, not in the way of lurking predators or malfunctioning sentry drones, but in a deeper, more intangible way, an awareness woven into the very bones of the world. He was a scavenger, an explorer of things better left untouched. Humanity had not been long in the stars, but it had learned quickly. Knowledge was power, but knowledge could also be death. Still, Elias thrived on risk. He had gambled his life 1,000 times over, and fortune had not yet abandoned him. Not yet. His fingers brushed against the scorched wall of a ruined temple, its surface etched with a language long unreadable. Once, these halls had been sacred. Once they had held reverence for something Elias could only begin to imagine. But now, they were nothing but cold and broken remnants of a species that had built its gods out of steel and war. And somewhere in this tomb, the prize he sought waited. The rumors had been thin, whispers among the outcasts, mad ramblings of those who had ventured too far beyond the mapped territories and returned with hollow eyes. An artifact of impossible power, left behind by the Vathun. The name alone was enough to unnerve the most hardened of starfarers. The Vathun were not legends. They were warnings. Every trace of their existence had been scrubbed from history. Not by time, not by war, but by a force far greater. No wreckage, no survivors, no recorded battles. They had simply vanished. And yet, the artifact remained. Elias had paid dearly for the coordinates. He had spent a fortune he didn't have, made enemies he couldn't afford, and burned bridges he would never rebuild. All for the promise of something that no one should ever possess. He should have turned back. He should have listened. But when his eyes fell upon the chamber, he knew that fate had already chosen for him. The entrance loomed before him, a jagged maw of obsidian stone carved into the depths of the earth. The air itself seemed to shudder, around it twisting the light unnaturally, as though space itself rebelled against the presence of what lay within. His breathing slowed. A deep breath. A final hesitation. Then he stepped inside. Darkness swallowed him whole. The descent was slow, the silence crushing. The deeper he went, the more the world above seemed to fade, as though he had crossed the threshold of reality itself. The weight of centuries pressed upon his shoulders, an unseen force whispering in the hollow spaces of his mind. Then, at the heart of the abyss, he saw it. A blade, suspended in the void, untouched by time. It was no ordinary weapon, no mere sword crafted by mortal hands. Its form was both intricate and terrifying, a dark metal that swallowed light, edges that blurred between dimensions, engravings that shimmered with alien symbols. The Oblivion Blade. It did not rest upon an altar. It did not sit within a pedestal waiting for a chosen wielder. It simply existed, and in that existence it defied every law Elias had ever known. It was alive, not in the way of organic things, not in the manner of beasts or men, but in something far more fundamental. A hum resonated through the air, a vibration in the bones of the world. It was ancient, it was waiting, and when Elias reached for it, it reached back. The instant his fingers brushed against the hilt, the universe shattered. A pulse of raw, unfiltered power exploded outward, a ripple that spread through time and space, shaking reality to its core. The ruins trembled, dust and debris cascading from the ceilings as the echoes of something long buried awakened. The whispers turned to voices. They spoke in a language his mind could not comprehend, but his soul could feel. The blade had not been meant for human hands. It had been crafted for something greater, something beyond the limits of flesh and mortality. And yet it did not reject him. It accepted. It chose. For the first time in countless millennia, the Oblivion Blade had found a master. Elias gasped. The weight of infinity pressing down on him, knowledge searing through his mind, memories of wars that had never been written, of civilizations consumed in an instant, of gods that had fallen before the blade's wrath. The power was beyond measure, beyond reason. And then, the truth came crashing down. The moment he had touched it, the universe had known. Across the vastness of space, they had felt it. The silent watchers, the hidden emperors, the things that lurked in the spaces between stars, the Imperium Zenith, the Abyssal Collective, the Ve'ari Order, all of them. The moment the blade had bonded to him, it had sent a signal that could not be ignored. A new wielder had risen, and now they were coming. The stillness in the chamber shattered as the hum of the Oblivion Blade intensified. Elias stood frozen, heart hammering in his chest, his fingers gripping the weapon's hilt with a force that sent a shock of energy coursing through his body. His mind reeled, overwhelmed by the flood of alien knowledge, of ancient memories too, vast for a mortal to comprehend. It was as though the blade was alive inside him, whispering to him in a voice that wasn't a voice at all. Its presence, its power, its purpose. But before he could process what had just happened, before he could begin to understand the depths of the power now thrumming in his veins, a sharp metallic screech tore through the air, a vibration in the air, subtle yet undeniable. Something was coming. Elias knew it instinctively, a primal recognition that sent his blood running cold. The blade which had chosen him was now drawing attention, not just from the dead world around him, but from beyond. The pulse he had triggered was no whisper. It was a siren call, one that resonated across the stars, and the galaxy would respond. His hand trembled as he withdrew the blade from its resting place, the very act of holding it feeling like a defiance against nature itself. But as the weapon became fully his, the whispers of the Oblivion Blade grew louder. It no longer communicated in fragments. Now it was one voice, clear and thunderous, echoing in his mind with the gravity of 1,000 suns. You will not survive this, human. It was not a threat, not exactly, more like a warning. Elias's breath caught in his throat. His first instinct was to throw the blade away, to let it return to whatever dark, forgotten place it had come from. But a part of him, a small, defiant part, refused. With a snap of his will, the voice faded. The blade's hum settled back into a low, steady vibration, almost like a heartbeat. But the danger was real now. He could feel it. Something immense, something ancient closing in on him. He didn't have time to think. His eyes darted to the small datapad on his wrist. The coordinates, the paths, everything he had used to get here. It all screamed that he needed to leave now. But as he turned toward the exit, a sudden shockwave rattled the chamber. The walls trembled and the ground beneath him shook violently. It was as though the universe itself was trying to tear the planet apart. Elias stumbled, gripping the hilt of the Oblivion Blade to steady himself, and then a crackling sound echoed through the space, a distorted transmission, one that pierced through the atmosphere and into his mind like an invasive thorn. Target acquired, commencing retrieval. The voice was cold, mechanical, completely devoid of emotion. Before Elias could react, the shadows in the chamber flickered, shifting, warping. Something was here. A figure appeared before him, tall and cloaked in a suit of dark metal, sleek and shimmering with an eerie, unnatural shine. Elias could hear the faint hiss of machinery, the cold whir of servos, the hum of energy that thrummed through the figure's form. It stepped forward, its presence commanding and unnervingly quiet. Elias's hand clenched tighter around the Oblivion Blade. The air around him seemed to freeze, the room holding its breath as the figure slowly raised a gloved hand toward him. I I'm Calix of the Imperium Zenith. The voice was deep, mechanical, yet undeniably human in its cadence. You are in possession of something far beyond your understanding. Elias took a step back, his mind racing. The Imperium Zenith, the empire that had ruled the galaxy for centuries with an iron fist. Calix, an elite enforcer, a hunter. He could almost hear the thousands of soldiers backing the figure, feel the weight of their collective power pressing in on him. Let me make this simple, human, Calix continued, his tone almost bored. The Oblivion Blade is not meant for you. Hand it over now, and we'll consider your existence inconsequential. Elias knew that this was it. This was the moment. The weapon was far more than any military could contain. The power it held, the devastation it could unleash was enough to wipe entire planets from existence with a thought. And yet, something held him back from surrendering. The whispers inside his mind, the pulse of the blade, he felt the truth deep within him. He wasn't just holding this weapon, it was holding him. His eyes locked onto Calix, the enforcer's, expression unreadable behind the gleaming faceplate. Elias had no doubt that Calix would have him dead in seconds if he resisted. But he couldn't give up. Not now. I don't think you understand. Elias spoke, his voice shaking but steady. I didn't choose this, but this blade, it doesn't listen to anyone. It's not something you can take. It chooses who wields it. And right now, I'm the one it's chosen. Calix remained silent, his gaze unyielding, as though considering Elias's words. For a moment, the air between them seemed to hold its breath. And then, the silence shattered. With a sudden, brutal motion, Calix extended his arm, releasing a stream of energy that ripped through the air with the force of a collapsing star. Elias barely had time to react as the blast struck the ground in front of him, sending him sprawling backward. The force of the impact rattled him to his core, but he couldn't stop now. The blade was alive. He felt the energy surge through him, racing like wildfire, burning away all hesitation. His fingers closed around the hilt, and in the next instant he knew. With a single thought, a single command, the world around him bent. The blade flared with impossible light, the air shimmered, distorting as though reality itself warped under the weight of the weapon. Calix was thrown back by the sheer force of the surge, crashing into the far wall with a deafening impact. The blade hummed, thrumming in Elias's hand as the world around him exploded into chaos. The chamber twisted and churned as though it were a living thing, and for the first time since his discovery of the blade, Elias felt a terrible clarity. This was not just a weapon. It was the key to something greater, something that had been hidden for millennia. And as the vibrations of the blade faded, leaving the air crackling with energy, Elias understood. They were coming, and they wouldn't stop until they had the Oblivion Blade back. The galaxy would not rest until it had reclaimed the power that had been stolen from it, and neither would Elias. With one final glance at the shattered walls around him, Elias made a decision. He would run. He would survive. And whatever it took, he would learn to control this weapon, to unlock its secrets, before anyone else could. The galaxy was about to change, and he would be at the center of it. Elias didn't wait for the dust to settle. He couldn't afford to. The weight of the Oblivion Blade in his hand pulsed like an anchor, pulling him deeper into a storm he wasn't prepared for. His breath came in ragged gasps as he scrambled to his feet, eyes darting to the entrance of the chamber. Calix, the enforcer of the Imperium Zenith, had been thrown back by the blade's overwhelming power, but that didn't mean he was out of the fight. Elias could feel the enforcer's presence still lingering like a shadow that would not relent. He was in deep, in over his head. And there was no turning back. The vibrations from the blade still hummed through his body, each thrum like a distant heartbeat urging him forward. The force, the intelligence, it had fused with him the moment his hand had gripped its hilt. The blade was more than just a weapon. It was a consciousness, a force that had been waiting for millennia to find a vessel. And Elias? He was its vessel now, whether he liked it or not. But what did that mean? Every flicker of thought, every Whisper of the blade led him down paths he didn't understand. Its intent was clear, to end worlds. And yet Elias felt something else beneath the surface. A gnawing sense that the blade's true purpose was far more complex than simple destruction. He could feel it, like a hidden language trapped within the weapon's core. But there was no time to unlock it, no time to think. The Imperium wouldn't be the only force after him. Elias's heart raced as the chamber's walls shifted around him. The ancient structure trembled once more, its foundations shaking as the pulse of energy that had erupted from the blade sent ripples through the entire planet's crust. He didn't know how much time he had before the Imperium sent reinforcements, or worse, the Abyssal Collective who would tear him apart without a second thought. The clock was ticking. With a sudden terrible clarity, Elias knew what he had to do. He didn't know how, but the blade did. His fingers tightened around its hilt once more, and for the briefest of moments the world seemed to slip away. The chamber blurred, the very air distorting as the blade's power reached out, consuming him in a torrent of incomprehensible knowledge. And then, he was gone. Moments later, Elias found himself standing at the edge of a vast chasm, the remnants of Zalith 9 stretching out beneath him. A silent, desolate abyss yawned below, a broken world. The planet had been ravaged, scarred by the wars that had once consumed it. This was no longer just a place of ruins. It was a tomb, and Elias was the only living thing left to walk its forgotten surface. His heart raced as the Oblivion blade thrummed, its power still crackling in his mind. The landscape stretched on for miles, but Elias knew that the time to escape was now. He had to move, but as his ship, the Wayfarer, loomed in the distance, a new presence made itself known. A figure appeared, stepping from the shadows of the dying world, silent and deliberate. It was humanoid, but far too still, too composed. The air around it seemed to ripple as though reality itself recoiled in its presence. Elias knew immediately who it was. Viel Ros, an alien warrior from the Abyssal Collective, a species that lived and died by one singular creed, to hunt. "You will not escape." Velros' voice reverberated through the air, a low, guttural sound that seemed to vibrate deep within Elias's chest. There was no emotion in it, only purpose. The blade was not meant for your kind. Elias stood his ground. His fingers itched for the weapon, but he could feel it thrumming, restless. It wanted to destroy. It wanted to erase the threat in front of him. It wanted to fulfill its purpose. But Elias had already learned one thing. The blade did not define him. He could not be its tool. Not yet. "You don't understand," Elias said, his voice cutting through the air, rough with the weight of everything that had happened. "It wasn't meant for anyone, it wasn't meant for me, but now it's mine. And if you think you can take it from me, you're going to have to kill me first." Velros did not respond immediately. His gaze was cold, calculating. He was not like Calix, who had acted with the arrogance of someone certain of victory. No. Velros was different. He was patient. And then, without a word, he lunged. The movement was swift, so swift that Elias barely had time to react. He had no time to prepare. The Abyssal warrior was upon him before he could even draw breath, and, with a speed that defied logic, Vielros drew a long, jagged blade from his side and swung it toward Elias. In that instant, the world seemed to slow. Elias could feel the blade's power surging through him, a pulse of energy that warped the space around them. The air was thick with heat and static as he raised the Oblivion blade, barely managing to deflect the incoming strike. Sparks flew as the two blades met with a sound like the tearing of metal, the impact sending a shockwave rippling outward. Elias staggered back, his heart racing. Velros, unfazed, pressed forward with inhuman precision, his movements a blur of deadly efficiency. This was no mere battle, it was a test of will. The Oblivion blade sang in Elias's grip, urging him to take control. He could feel it pushing him, its power offering him the strength to strike down Velros with a single blow. It was tempting, so tempting. But Elias resisted. He would not be a slave to the blade. Not again. With a shout, he forced the blade to its limits, parrying another strike from Velros and twisting his body to evade the next. He felt the burning power of the Oblivion blade surging through him, but he kept it in check, forcing himself to think beyond destruction, beyond violence. Velros hesitated for the briefest moment, and that was all Elias needed. With a swift, calculated move, he disarmed the Abyssal warrior, knocking his blade from his grasp, but the victory was short-lived. Velros, now unarmed, didn't pause. Instead, he smiled, or at least what passed for a smile in his alien face, and drew something from beneath his cloak. A device. It hummed to life with an eerie glow, a small sphere pulsating with a dark energy. Elias knew what it was before. Velros spoke. A countermeasure, Velros said, his tone still unfeeling. The blade may be powerful, but there are ways to contain it. Elias felt a chill run through him. The device in Velros's hand was not something he could easily escape. The Abyssal Collective had studied the Vathun, and they had developed countermeasures for their most dangerous weapons. He had only moments to act. Elias's pulse hammered in his ears as he stood before Velros, the Abyssal warrior's hand trembling with the power of the device he held. The dark energy swirling within the sphere threatened to devour everything it touched. Elias could feel it, a silent hum in the air, as if the very fabric of reality was holding its breath. The Oblivion blade pulsed in his grip, its energy vibrating through him. He could hear its voice now, louder than ever, its whispers more insistent. Destroy. Obliterate. Erase them all. But something inside Elias refused. The blade's power was irresistible, undeniable, but he had to resist it. He had seen its potential for destruction, felt the hunger in it, but he wasn't ready to become a force of annihilation. The galaxy wasn't ready for that, and he didn't even know if he was. The device in Velros's hand hummed louder, more intensely. Elias could feel the pressure building. The Abyssal warrior had no intention of letting him walk away from this, alive. "You've already failed, human," Velros growled, his voice low, guttural. "The blade's power was always meant to be mine. And yet here you are, clinging to a tool that is far beyond your understanding. You are a fool." Elias didn't flinch. He could feel the saturation of the Oblivion blade's power coursing through him. He could feel the potential to end Velros with a single strike, to cut through the alien warrior's hardened form as though it were paper. But as he raised the blade, the words of the Vathun flashed in his mind, their warning, their test. The blade had not been made to serve anyone, not even the Vathun. It had been crafted to destroy, to erase, to test the heart of those who came to wield it. Elias's grip tightened, but his mind was clear. He would not succumb. Not today. He took a step forward. "Not today, Velros," Elias said, his voice firm despite the fear gnawing at him. "The blade may have chosen me, but I choose to use it differently." With one sudden movement, he swung the Oblivion blade toward Velros. The warrior blocked it with a quick, fluid motion, but as the blades clashed, a shock wave of energy exploded outward, ripping through the air with an earth-shattering roar. The energy surged through the chamber as if the entire planet's surface was responding to the conflict. The weapon was alive, and Elias was learning to control it. But Velros wasn't done. He wasn't just going to give up. With the flick of his wrist, the device in his hand unleashed a blinding pulse of dark energy, slamming into Elias's chest with the force of a collapsing star. The blast sent him hurtling backward, crashing into a pillar. His vision blurred, his body shuddering from the impact. The Oblivion blade slipped from his grasp, landing several meters away. "This is your end, human," Velros's voice echoed, full of cold certainty. Elias gasped for breath, his lungs burning, his limbs sluggish. The pain was almost unbearable, but he forced himself to focus. The Oblivion blade was still within reach, but something else was happening. A surge of energy, a connection that he didn't understand but could feel in every fiber of his being. The blade called to him, and he answered with a violent, primal effort. Elias surged forward, grabbing the weapon and rising to his feet. The blade's power coursed through him, rekindling the fire within. He could feel the force of it, a raw, untamed power that made his heart race. But this time, Elias did not wield the blade to destroy. This time, he wielded it to defend. Valros lunged again, but Elias was faster. He swung the Oblivion blade in a sweeping arc, the energy it released cutting through the air like a scythe. The Abyssal Warrior was thrown back once more, his form crumpling as he collided with the ruins of Zalith 9's collapsing structure. The device Valros had used to trap him in this deadly dance sparked and sputtered, its dark energy dimming. Elias could feel the tides of battle turning, but it wasn't over yet. More forces were coming. Elias could feel the rumble of warships, Imperial, alien, and something worse, looming just beyond the horizon. The universe had already responded to the Oblivion Blade's awakening, and soon they would converge on him from all directions. The galaxy was watching, waiting, and in that moment, Elias understood the truth. The blade wasn't just a weapon, it was a beacon. The universe had been waiting for someone to wield it. To wield it. Elias turned his gaze to the skies above, the shimmer of starships already appearing in the distance. He was a threat now. He was a target. But he was also something more. The whispers of the Oblivion blade grew louder in his mind, and Elias could hear them more clearly than ever. You have the power to decide their fate. All of them. You can end this, or you can begin something new. His choice. The sky above Zalith 9 began to twist, stars flickering in a chaotic dance. The incoming ships, the Imperium, the Collective, the Order, they were all in range. And then, without hesitation, Elias made his decision. He raised the blade high, and for the first time, he let its full power surge. The universe answered his call, bending and shifting around him. The blade hummed, resonating with the very fabric of reality. The stars seemed to burn brighter. The fabric of space seemed to tremble, and with one final deafening pulse of energy, Elias unleashed the full might of the Oblivion blade, not to destroy, but to reshape. The shockwave that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever known. A violent ripples tore through space-time, warping the very core of existence, and just as quickly everything went silent. The ships, the forces converging on him, all of it faded, as though reality had reset itself. The galaxy was not the same anymore. The power of the Oblivion blade had been unleashed, but instead of erasing everything in its wake, Elias had shaped a new path forward. A path where humanity could stand alongside the stars, but not at their mercy. Elias lowered the blade, breathing heavily, his mind exhausted. He had chosen to reshape reality, to offer a future, not to take everything in his path. And now, standing amidst the ruins of Zalith 9, he understood what the blade had been meant to teach him. It was not the power of destruction that defined him. It was the will to choose what came next. The silence that followed the pulse of the Oblivion blade was profound, overwhelming. Elias stood alone amidst the ruins of Zalith 9, his breath ragged, his chest heaving with the aftershock of the battle and the unimaginable power he had unleashed. The air around him shimmered, as if reality itself were still catching up to what had just happened. The energy from the blade had altered something fundamental, not just in the physical space around him, but in the fabric of the galaxy itself. The stars, once burning with their familiar light, now felt distant, their glow uncertain, as though the boundaries of time and space had been stretched and reshaped. The very rules had been rewritten. Elias didn't know what had changed. Not fully, but he knew that the galaxy had witnessed something immense, a power that had never before been seen in the hands of a human. And in the wake of that power, he could already feel the consequences beginning to unfold. The ship, Wayfarer, lay dormant in the distance, the last tether to his past. He had been a scavenger, a rogue, someone who had lived in the shadows of civilizations far older and more advanced than humanity. Now he was something more, and the weight of that was almost unbearable. For a moment he almost wished he could go back to the life before the blade, before the constant pressure of holding the fate of countless lives in his hands. But then the truth settled within him. There was no going back. There never had been. The pulse from the blade had attracted every faction in the galaxy, and they were already regrouping, recalculating. The Imperium Zenith, the Abyssal Collective, the Vayari Order, they had all felt the power shift. The moment the blade's energy surged, the balance had tipped, and the universe had taken notice. But Elias didn't feel fear anymore. He had chosen. He had made his stand, not for dominance or control, but for the future. The blade had been a test, and he had passed it. Not with violence, not with destruction, but with the will to choose a different path, a path where humanity could stand on its own. In the distance, a flicker of light grew brighter. A ship, perhaps from the Imperium, appeared on the horizon. They were coming. Elias's grip tightened around the Oblivion blade, but he didn't raise it. He didn't need to. He had already made his choice. The blade was no longer just a weapon, it was a symbol of human resilience, a symbol of what could be accomplished when power was used with wisdom and restraint. His thoughts were interrupted by a voice, a familiar, calming presence in the chaos. It was the voice of Dr. Eliana Corrin, the rogue scientist who had helped him decode the secrets of the blade. "Elias, are you there?" His comms crackled to life, the voice faint but steady. "I'm here, Eliana," Elias replied, his voice more steady than he felt. He looked up at the incoming ship, its silhouette growing larger. "I don't know what's coming next, but I think we have a lot of explaining to do." Eliana's laughter echoed through the comms, though it was laced with an undeniable tension. "I think that's the understatement of the century. But I've been tracking the results of your little cosmic display. The galaxy is changing, Elias. You've shifted the balance. They'll be coming for you, for us, for everything. They'll want to know what you did, and they'll want to control it." Elias stared into the distance, his mind racing as the implications of her words hit him. They couldn't control it. The power of the Oblivion blade wasn't something that could be bottled up, sealed away, or used as a weapon. It had become something far greater than a tool of destruction. It was a new beginning. "I didn't do it to control anything," Elias said, his voice quiet, almost to himself. "I did it to give humanity a chance to decide our own fate, not to be pawns of some ancient force, not to let the galaxy dictate our survival." Eliana was silent for a long moment, long. Then her voice, more somber now, came through again. "I know, but the universe doesn't like change, Elias. Not this kind of change. They'll come for you. They'll come for all of us." Elias nodded. He didn't need to hear it again. He knew the galaxy would come. The powers that had watched in silence would now seek to control or destroy him. But in the pit of his stomach, he felt something else, a surge of something like hope. Humanity had been underestimated for far too long, and now they had the chance to prove their worth. Elias had the chance to prove it. As the ship drew closer, Elias turned his gaze away from the horizon. The incoming fleet, the forces of a galaxy that had once seen humanity as nothing more than a fleeting, insignificant species, would soon arrive. And they would demand answers. They would demand the Oblivion blade. But they would find that it wasn't the weapon that mattered. It was the human who had wielded it. The choice Elias had made would shape the future, whether they were ready for it or not. The ship landed, its sleek form settling gently into the dust of Zalith 9's surface. As the ramp lowered, Elias felt the weight of the moment settle on him. The galaxy would no longer view humanity with disdain, nor with fear. They would have no choice but to reckon with what had just happened, and in that reckoning, humanity would find its place. Not in the shadows of ancient empires, but standing at the helm of the stars, ready to forge its own path forward. The Oblivion blade, the key to unimaginable power, had been reshaped into something more. It was a symbol of humanity's future, a future shaped by choice, by strength, and by the will to survive. As Elias stepped forward, the weight of the weapon in his hand no longer felt like a burden, it felt like a promise. The galaxy was changing, and humanity was leading the way. The galaxy was still. For the first time in countless ages, the chaos of conflict, the hunger for power, the constant clash of empires, it all paused. Elias stood alone beneath the light of 1,000 stars, the Oblivion blade at his side. its energy no longer pulsing with the same violent force it had carried in the past. Now, it felt almost reverent, as though it too understood the weight of the decision he had made. The galaxy had been reshaped, not with violence, not with destruction, but with the will to change. The ship behind him, Wayfarer, remained in silence. The crew, his only allies, had long since left, understanding that Elias now had a path to walk alone. A new era was upon them all. There would be no going back to the shadows. There would be no more hiding behind the veneer of insignificance. Elias had forced the universe to recognize humanity as a force in its own right. But as the stars shimmered above, Elias knew that this peace, this stillness, would not last. It couldn't. The factions of the galaxy, the Imperium Zenith, the Abyssal, Collective, the Vayari Order, they had felt the pulse of the Oblivion Blade. They had seen its power, and they would not sit idly by. The galaxy, for all its diversity, its age, and its wisdom, was not ready for the future that Elias had ushered in. And they would come for him. They would come for humanity. But Elias was ready. He had seen the truth of the blade, that it was not a weapon to control, but a tool of change, one that could shape destinies, reshape empires, and build a future not dictated by the whims of ancient powers. The galaxy was on the brink of a new chapter, one that no one, not even the oldest species, could predict. Humanity's place in the stars would not be dictated by others. It would be forged. And then, just as Elias turned to step aboard the Wayfarer, once again a sudden flash of light appeared in the distance, a ship emerging from the shadow of a nearby nebula. The sleek silhouette was unmistakable. It was another player, a new faction, one that Elias hadn't expected, one that had remained hidden, waiting for the right moment to step into the light. Elias paused, his hand on the ship's hatch. A surge of anticipation flooded him, but this time it was different. He was no longer the hunted. He was the one who held the power, the one who now had the choice to make. The galaxy might be coming for him, but this time it would be on his terms. The future was unwritten, but Elias would write it himself. The galaxy would never be the same again, and for the first time in the history of the stars, humanity would lead.